It's good to see people push back on what's a very obvious betrayal of what you promised. No more wars. Yet, here we are on the brink of another endless war in the Middle East. But then there's never money for Medicaid. There's never money for cleaning up the streets. You got to deploy the military to the streets, not feed the people that are homeless. If we work together to address some of these problems at home before we were so trigger happy to launch wars on the other side of the world, maybe we wouldn't see the kind of despair that we see in this country. There's a pretty interesting interview this week between Tucker Carlson and Ted Cruz, two people admittedly I'm not a big fan of, but it's exposing a rift in the MAGA coalition, in the new Republican Party, that I think highlights how committed some people in government are to war in general, but specifically war in the Middle East, regime change in Iran, and just that there's a lot of curious mental gymnastics around why we need to invest so much money in wars abroad, sometimes in Ukraine, sometimes in Israel, and how we ultimately benefit from these investments. And so in this interview, that's a lot of what Tucker Carlson is asking Ted Cruz. He mentions, I'm walking around DC and there's homeless people everywhere. It's a dump. And we keep, I think Ted Cruz they sent $80 billion to Ukraine for the war. And he says he used to support it, now he doesn't. Any type of criticism, he's always kind of like, but I love Donald Trump. Like, do you? So I think there were some really good gotcha moments. There's been a lot of reporting on it in the media, but this one in particular I thought was really good. Let's play this clip. This is about taking money from Apac, and I'll react right after this.
Another country. Why are you mad at Israel?
I guess. No. I'm hardly the one who. I've never taken money from the Israel lobby. Have you?
Taken money from the Israel?
From APAC.
So APAC raises a lot of money for me, but it's actually a misnomer because the people who raise money are individuals. So it's not the PAC itself, but they're individual members who believe in the American-Israeli friendship
is
and relationship.
APAC a foreign lobby?
No, it's an American lobby. It's the APAC stands for the America-Israeli Political Action.
What does it lobby for?
So, to be honest, not a whole lot effectively. Listen, I came into Congress 13 years ago with the stated intention of being the leading defender of Israel in the United States Senate.
Great.
And I've worked every day to do that. APAC, a lot of times, APAC, I wish were much more effective. Like, they're folks online who are in the fever swamp of terrified of APAC, and APAC...
I'm not terrified of APAC at all. You're the one who seems a little uncomfortable when I'm asking.
No, not uncomfortable at all.
I'm just asking what APAC does. My understanding, having known a lot of people with APAC, is that it lobbies on behalf of the Israeli government.
Wrong.
Oh, okay.
America has thousands.
So it's a lot of really interesting, I think, misdirection happening
Something I love almost
around his answer to that question. It's not a foreign lobby, it's an American lobby. And actually they do a pretty bad job. And clearly not really trying to answer the question, but I think he's right. Tucker Carlson's right that he's asking, you're the one that seems kind of uncomfortable with receiving money from this PAC. And then, he's sort of obtuse about it, where he's like, oh, they don't do a very good job, and I wish they did more. And they don't raise money, individual donors, so he's kind of overwhelming you with a lot of different details around the question to avoid answering the question. Let's see, watch the rest of it.
Last time APAC took a position that deviated from Prime Minister Netanyahu.
All the time.
Anyone?
Okay. Let me go back and give a little history. If you want to do a deep dive on APAC.
So he asked him just very straightforward question. Can you name one? Can you name one where can you name any daylight any issue where there's daylight between the Prime Minister of Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu and Apac. And he goes, well, let me give you a history lesson.
APAC.
I don't. I want to do a shallow dive that gets. No. I want to get to the core question. APAC is lobbying for a foreign government, and I don't. It's not. It's lobbying for the Unied States.
It is lobbying for a strong U.S.-Israeli relationship.
Okay. So it's not has nothing to do with the foreign government.
It wants America and Israel to be closely allied.
Okay, but it's lobbying on behalf of the interests of another country.
So that's not true at all. And if
It's not true.
No.
How much contact do you think APAC leaders have with the government of Israel?
No idea. I imagine some. I think the government of Israel is often frustrated with APAC.
Do you think there's any
not nearly strong enough?
Do you think there's any coordination between the government of Israel and APAC?
Do they talk? Sure. If you're lobbying for more U.S.-Mexico trade, would you talk to people in the U.S. and Mexico and the government? Sure. Like if.
So I'm not mad about that. There are a million countries that lobby Washington. I like a lot of those countries, including
Okay,
Israel.
but APAC are Americans. They're not Israelis.
Hold on. There are tons of Americans who lobby on behalf of foreign governments. I know them. I'm related to some of them. I know how it works. I'm from here. So my question is not, is it outrageous that foreign governments lobby the United States? They all do, okay, including Israel. My only question is, why don't we admit that is what's happening? You're denying it, but it's true. And why aren't they registered as a foreign lobby?
Because they're not.
They're not a foreign lobby.
No, they're not. And this is there's a fever swamp. Look,
it's not a fever swamp. These are very reasonable questions, and you've accused me of being obsessed with Israel, which I'm not.
I actually haven't. I've said
and being feverish about it, which I'm not at all. I find it's a very tender spot when you ask it, and I don't know why.
So, Tucker, all right, let's go back. I was first elected to the Senate in 20.
All right, yeah. And then, he goes on to talk about how he, I guess, ran for the U.S. Senate, I think, on this whole, to become the biggest defender of Israel or something. And so, again, I'm not a fan of either of these two guys. But it does expose this rift between being pro-Israel and being willing, I think, to help your closest allies. And I think what Ted Cruz was saying was that, yeah, if you're working on behalf of U.S. Mexico, then yeah, your political action committees, your lobbying groups, they're all gonna talk to each other. I think nobody's disputing that. I think what Tucker Carlson, I think, rightfully is calling out is that there seems to be this discomfort with talking about how different lobbying groups and PACs, without getting lost in the details and semantics of whether they represent the government and how much control, how much connection do they have in coordination, there is money going to ensure that there's an outcome, right? That the politicians that AIPAC backs are going to be pro-Israel, that in moments like now where Israel is antagonizing Iran and launching missiles at sites with or without, Trump's consent, it's kind of unclear. There is this, I think, knee-jerk reaction to look away and say, no, that's not what's happening here. And if you question it, you're an anti-Semite. And there's another exchange in this video where, Tucker's asking him about the population of Iran, the ethnic makeup of Iran, and he doesn't really seem to know that much about it. He asks him about why, he says, I like Israel, like I'm supportive of them, I'm supportive of our allies. And Ted Cruz pivots to, the reason I'm pro-Israel is because it was taught to me in Sunday school, and that your God will save you or whatever if you are aligned with Israel. And so he asks him, does that mean the government of Israel? Does the Bible specifically say that if you don't support Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, that Jesus will not accept you or something? And, and I think, Ted Cruz kind of plays dumb over what it means, but it does expose this, I think, breaking point of where rubber meets the road in terms of what are we getting dragged into. You know, you could be fervently pro your family, your spouse, your friend, and they could also take advantage of that. That could be weaponized against you to say, well, you know, Brian says that he's 100% committed to me, so if he doesn't come with me to rob a bank, then I'm going to call him names and smear him. And in a lot of ways, that's what seems to be happening kind of in this world where as things get more and more tense in the Middle East, there are people on one side, the Steve Bannons, the Tucker Carlsons, who are saying, the Candace Owens, who are, you know, we're pro-Israel, but this is where we draw the line. And Trump ran on stopping forever wars. He's been running on it since 2016, even though he's been very antagonistic towards Iran. He's not a somebody who's trying to avoid conflict. So he's not anti-war. He claimed that he was, but he's not. And I think that's why a lot of politicians, a lot of political commentators are maybe starting to sway a little bit. Last week, comedian Dave Smith said that he regretted voting for Trump. He regretted supporting him. He's a libertarian, anti-war, and expressing, you know, his disappointment with, you know, you said that we were going to stop this. And there were early signs in the administration that maybe it was like, okay, he's going to end the war in Gaza. He's going to force Benjamin Netanyahu to back off. He's going to withhold support because when it's unconditional, you're just letting them do whatever they want without really understanding, or not necessarily understanding, without, I think, looking at the second, third, fourth order consequences of what happens the further and further we keep getting dragged into wars in the Middle East, when the end of your last term was marked by, let's get out of Afghanistan. And you consider, you know, the Steve Bannons who are saying, you know, we need to, I think J.D. Vance says something like this, where we need to pivot to Asia. You know, that's where economically we have more invested. In terms of our adversaries, you know, our relationship with China has never been more tense. And so, but again, we're getting sucked back into what seems to be, you know, like on the verge of a major escalation with a country with 90 million people in it. You know, Iran is not Hezbollah. It's not Gaza. They have a real military. They have real allies, Russia and China. So, you know, as someone observing, you know, what, you know, people that I think they start off the interview saying, you know, we agree on so much. We agree on 80%. Tucker Carlson and Ted Cruz say that. We agree on most things, but this one issue in terms of how we support Israel is where these guys kind of start to diverge, and there's a very serious, I think, rift happening in the Republican Party where they don't know how far to take it, and that this is actually the antithesis of what Trump promised. A lot of people said, I'm willing to put up with whatever as long as he stops the wars. That I can't vote for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris because they didn't stand up to Israel. So it's like, Trump's going to fix it. We're going to be pro-Israel, but we're not going to support forever wars. We're not going to support excursions into Iran. There was a video this week of Jon Stewart talking about it, where he's using clips of Netanyahu, I think as far back as 2012, saying that Iran is weeks away from uranium enrichment, you know, levels that they need for a nuclear weapon. And then again in 2018. That is just the same story of what happened in Iraq. They're weeks away, days away from a nuclear weapon, and we need to act now. And then fast forward 25 years and look at the disaster. So I watched the full interview. I watched the full 2 hours. It's very tense. I think they sort of I feel like they sort of deserve each other. Tucker Carlson is just very smug and condescending throughout a lot of the interview. Ted Cruz, I think, is just classic, like, I think, like, quintessential politician, that he'll just say anything and misdirect and confuse and overwhelm to get you to see, to convince you. And that's why whenever he's asked a direct question, he calls Tucker Carlson names. He starts to, well, like, let me give you a history lesson. We can't just, like, do this simply. And I think that's a symptom of, like, yeah, let me confuse you. We can't just talk about why the U.S. is supporting a foreign government seemingly to no end. It has to be like, well, here's all this background story. Let me tell you about my Sunday school teaching. I personally really, I enjoyed the interview. I don't watch a lot of Tucker Carlson, certainly not a lot of Ted Cruz, but it was good. It's good to see people push back on what's a very obvious betrayal of what you promised, which is no more wars. Yet here we are on the brink of another war, another endless war in the Middle East. But then there's never money for Medicaid. There's never money for cleaning up the street. Instead, we got to deploy the military to the streets, not feed the people that are homeless. The cities all have, tons of problems. I live in New York City. I used to live in Los Angeles. There are tons and tons of problems. But if we approached, what they claim, a lot of Republicans claim that I love San Francisco, I love Los Angeles. It's a shame what Democrats have done to it. If we work together to address some of these problems at home before we were so trigger happy to launch wars on the other side of the world, maybe we wouldn't see the kind of despair that we see in this country.